Hey guys, this is Pat from Custom Lux PCs, and this is going to be the first of several videos of me explaining the basics of gaming PCs to people that may not be as informed as others when they're selecting a gaming computer. So in this video I'm going to be covering the frequently asked questions or concerns that I get from a lot of customers. Now, the first one has to do with FPS. Of course, every gamer is concerned about how much FPS they're going to get in a certain title. And most of those customers that I encounter are talking about Fortnite. So if you just simply ask any company or anybody who's building you a computer, how many FPS am I going to get? That's not a good question. There are three determinants that could sway the FPS in one direction or the other. And those determinants are the monitor resolution, the game, and the game settings. So the monitor, we'll talk about monitors first. Now, there are really three classes of monitors in terms of refresh rates. The first is the very basic 60 Hertz. The middle ground is 144 Hertz. And then there's the extreme of 240 Hertz. Obviously, there's some in between, but let's talk about those 3 points because they're the main ones that most monitors are at. 60 Hertz. That means if you have a 60 frame per second or 60 Hertz monitor, that means at maximum, regardless of your computer hardware, you're going to get 60 frames per second. Now, most of you out there who want to play competitively, who want to stream, you want to get a lot more frames than that. So if you have a 144 Hertz monitor, that will do the job. Visually, it will seem a lot smoother than a 60 frame or 60 Hertz monitor, and price-wise, they're going down, so it's not going to be that expensive. 240 Hertz, that is extreme on the upper extreme end, and honestly, there is not much of a difference visually between 144 Hertz and 240 Hertz. So I would say 144 Hertz is the mid-ground, is the sweet spot for a monitor for gaming computers. Now, in terms of resolution, you have 1080p, you have 1440p, and you have 4K. Now, I recommend 1080p for mid-range to even some upper-range builds, especially if you're playing competitively, because it doesn't matter. Competitively, you want to be as quick as you possibly can, meaning you want your frame rate to be as high as possible. So if you have a 1080p monitor versus a 1440, yeah, 1440 will look a little sharper, but 1080p will lower the graphics demand enough for you to get more FPS out of that monitor. So I definitely recommend for competitive gamers out there, 1080p, 144 frames per second, 144 Hertz. So the next two things that determine FPS are the game and the game settings. So if you're talking about Fortnite versus Warzone, those are two very different things. Fortnite has cartoon-like animated graphics and a very good graphics engine, meaning it can play well on a lot of different variations of PCs, low end and high end. But for games like Warzone, Red Dead Redemption 2, Cyberpunk, well, that didn't come out yet, but the games that are very realistic and may not be that well optimized, you might need a lot more performance in the graphics department to run those games. So keep that in mind as well. The third factor is game settings. So in any game, whether it be Fortnite or Warzone, you can select the game settings in the graphics settings as low, medium, high, or some combination of the three. And even there's ultra. So this will determine your FPS as well. If you play Fortnite at low settings or competitive settings versus epic settings, which is the other extreme, you're going to get a huge variation in FPS. So when you get your gaming computer, the best thing to do is to tweak the resolution, the game settings as well as you possibly can to get the best experience that you want to do, sacrificing FPS for detail, or you can sacrifice detail and get more FPS. It's kind of like a balance. So next, I want to talk about processors. A lot of customers come to me and insist on an i7 or a Ryzen 9 or an i9 processor. Now, this just isn't a smart thing to do if you want to save money and you want a really good gaming experience. If you're working on a lot of complex applications besides gaming, that's one thing. Even for streaming and gaming, an i7 is not necessary. So here I have a couple of processors. Let's look at the i3. This is the i3-9100F, right? And retail from Amazon or Newegg, you can get it for between $72 and $75. Whereas the i7 This is the 10th gen i7. This processor costs $400 just for the processor, and it doesn't even include a cooler. So you need a CPU cooler on top of that, most likely liquid cooling. So after it's all said and done, you'll be spending between $500 and $600 on just the processor and cooler. Meanwhile, the i3 is $75 and it has the cooler included. That is perfectly fine for all the applications of an i3. To show you an example, or to tell you an example, one of my friends, her name is Shadowcat on Twitch, she streams and games Destiny, Rocket League, Halo, GTA, all those types of games with an i3 9100F and a GTX 1060 graphics card. And before I gave her 8 gigs of more RAM, she was doing it with just 8 gigs of RAM rather than 16. So this goes to show you. And it's a high-end channel. It's 1080p, very good frame rates, and it looks very professional. So I'll put her link in the description below. And that goes to show you, you don't need to break the bank to have a really good gaming and streaming performance. i3 is perfect. Other processors that I do recommend, you have the Ryzen 3 3200G, the new Ryzen 3s that came out, the 3100 and the 3300X are fantastic. The Ryzen 5 3600, the i5 9600K, 9400, 10600K, those are fantastic. I even recommend the i5 10600K for high-end builds, or mid to high-end builds as well, for those of you who want 1440p streaming and gaming at the same time. It is a very good processor. But the total idea here overall, you do not need an i7 or a really high-end processor to game or stream with. So keep that in mind, it's just not necessary. The next thing I want to talk about is graphics cards. So unlike processors where you don't need to stress on getting the highest end, graphics card is going to be the most important part of your PC build when you're talking about performance, FPS, the clarity and the detail of your game. So for graphics cards, there is a huge range of graphics cards you can choose from, and I will go over more detail in another video. But there's low-end graphics. Well, there's no such thing as low-end graphics cards. You want to talk about performance. The GTX 1050 Ti, right? That is a processor or graphics card from 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, and it's the 1000 series, the lowest end of the 1000 series, and I would call it personally the bottom line. So it is the lowest performance that you want to get, that you can possibly get good gaming experience from. Everything above that in performance will do you is sufficient. And I say this because everything below it, there are a lot of graphics cards that are below it in performance. And I'm going to name some right now. The GT 1030, the GT 710, the GT 730, the RX 560, the RX 550, and even older generations, GTX 700 series, GTX 600 series, GTX 500 series. A lot of those graphics cards are just not good anymore. They're just not going to do you any good, and the performance will suck. And I see a lot of gaming PC companies, a lot of pre-built companies, they have a very nice looking gaming computer, but in the specs, it uses one of these taboo graphics cards that will not give you gaming experience, a good one at least. So it's good to avoid those, and it's good to understand the specs that you're going to get. But I understand that it is complicated because there's a plethora of graphics cards. So I would say the mark is GTX 1050 Ti or above. And if you're not sure if it's above, there's a website that I'll post in the description below that will tell you, that will compare GPUs, processors, and anything else you want to compare. And it'll go over, and you can put in GTX 1050 Ti, and on the other side you can put in whatever graphics card that you were looking at, and you can see if it's better or worse. And also it tells you the FPS that you'll expect in most modern games. So that is where I put the bottom line. Everything below that sucks, everything above that is pretty good. And then obviously you have your high-end RTX 2080 Ti, where the graphics card itself is over $1,000. So there's really a large range of things you can do, but if you're choosing your pre-built, come to me, message me on customluxpcs.com or on our Instagram, and I'll help you out. So the next thing, and the last thing I want to cover, is Modern Warfare. So I get a lot of inquiries about people who want to play Modern Warfare, as well as other games. The other games are fine. Fortnite, Valorant, whatever games you want to play, great. And with mid-range builds, it can handle it perfectly. So you don't really need that much. Mid-range builds, no problem. But for Modern Warfare, Warzone, the game is terribly optimized. What that means is you're going to need a lot more graphics performance to play it at reasonable frame rates and at reasonable settings. Now, Shadowcat, that streaming friend I told you about before, she plays Warzone but cannot stream it well, and it kind of crashes when she uses her i3-9100F and her GTX 1060. But when she does play it by itself, she plays it at low to medium settings, and it is sufficient. Now, just to give you an idea, she can play every other game no problem and stream it at the same time, but when you get to Warzone, it's a lot more difficult. So it's not a very well optimized game, and for graphics, I recommend at least a GTX 1660. 1650 Super would do alright as well. But in terms of pricing, if you want to play Warzone at really respectable graphics and frame rates, you want to be spending at least $800 or $900 on this computer. So I'm sorry that's the way it is in today's market, that below that you're not going to get a good bang for your buck, and the game won't look that great. So just keep that in mind as well. And actually there's one more thing, RAM, I want to talk about. So RAM, a lot of customers come to me and ask, oh, I need 32 gigs of RAM to get better. Do I need to add more RAM to get higher frame rates? The answer is basically no. Yes, if you go online and you compare 32 gigs of RAM versus 16, you'll get 10 more frames per second or 5 more frames per second. But RAM is just random access memory. Basically tells you how much or how many processes you could run at the same time that can be stored in temporary databases on your RAM. It has nothing to do with FPS and gaming performance. So, or virtually not much. It doesn't have much to do with it. You can get technical later. But I would say 16 gigs of RAM is a very good sweet spot for gaming computers. 32 for higher end builds is fine. And if you have 16 gigs, that's great. You can always expand later on. So for those of you who are in the mid-range build region of, let's say, $700 to $1,000, start out with 16 gigs. I definitely recommend that. You probably won't even notice a difference. You won't notice any slowdowns. But then maybe 4 or 5 years from now, expand that to 32 gigs. Maybe a couple years. Expand that to 32 gigs and you won't be disappointed. So that's it for this video. I hope you learned something about gaming PCs and starting out. And I'll be making more videos in the future. So buy PCs from Custom Lux. You can message me on my website and Instagram, and I'll get back to you within hours. So until next time.